This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons on a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 117, Thursday evening, April 7th, 2016. Solr. Hey guys.
Good evening.
We're recording this. We're recording this not on a Wednesday afternoon in a Google Hangout, but a Thursday evening in a Google Hangout. I appreciate you guys rescheduling for me. I had some stuff going on yesterday that was urgent and couldn't take 2 hours for the show, so here we are. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Not a problem. As I was telling you guys, this actually works out a little bit better because the house is quiet for the time being.
Awesome. And the gentleman with the quiet house is John Picozzi, coming to us from Tiverton, Rhode Island, and he works at Oomph.
I do. It's all true. It's all true.
I see you are wearing your Oomph shirt today.
I am, yes.
As proof?
One of the benefits, they give you free swag, which is good. Like free stuff.
Great. That's awesome. Also with us is Nick Laughlin from his new office in... Where are you? Where do you live?
Worcester.
Sorry. I was going to say Westerly. I knew that wasn't right. Worcester, Massachusetts. And he works for and owns Enlightened Development.
That's all true as well, except for the Westerly part.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't live in Westerly.
Is there a Westerly, Massachusetts?
I don't think so.
Probably. There's 350. There's a Peru, Massachusetts. So why would there be a Westerly? But certainly looking forward to today's topic. I think Solr is definitely one of the more interesting combinations with Drupal.
Yeah. So before we start talking about Solr, let's go through a few tips that we have. Nick, you have one, rubber duck debugging. Talk to us.
Yeah, so rubber duck debugging is something that has been around for a while, but I recently was exposed to. I think it's kind of interesting. And what it kind of refers to is that phenomenon as a developer. You'll get stuck on a bug, or you'll get stuck on a development, or you'll get stuck on a feature, and you'll find yourself trying to figure out how to get it working, and you'll reach out to somebody, whether it's a colleague or a coworker or somebody else, and say, "Hey, I'm having this issue. I'd like to talk to you." And you get on the phone with them. You set up a time. You screen share. You say, "I'm having this issue where, oh, never mind. I figured it out." So what rubber duck debugging is you have a little rubber duck on your desk, and before you call somebody and make a fool of yourself, although asking questions or asking for help isn't really making a fool of yourself, you tell the duck the problem you're having. Because sometimes just the process of taking a step out and explaining the problem shows you the solution. Where sometimes you just get stuck in the weeds, and just taking that 2 or 3 seconds to stop and say, here's the problem I'm having, makes you realize what the solution is. A recent example, I was having a major issue on a feature I was trying to roll out, wasn't getting the data back that I was supposed to be getting, spent all this time tweaking a bunch of stuff, changing a file back and forth 20, 30 times. Got on the phone with somebody, and the first thing they said is, did you clear cache and log out and log back in? And as soon as they started saying that, I realized that the data I was working with was cached pretty heavily. Cleared cache, everything worked. And, I'd spent a good 45 minutes to an hour trying to get that thing solved, and I had solved it a good 45 minutes to an hour earlier. So rubber duck debugging is something that's fairly common in the development world, and it's just a good way to help you solve those kinds of issues and before you get on the phone with someone.
So in reality, it doesn't have to actually be a rubber duck. It could be like a rubber frog or a Barbie doll.
Mine's a rubber donkey.
Or a rubber donkey. So, I mean, really, it's just like talk to inanimate objects on your desk debugging.
Thanks for clarifying that, John.
Well, I didn't want people... there would be a surge in the sales of rubber duckies, The Walmart algorithm would be going crazy because they'd be like, we're running out of rubber duckies in the Northeast.
Yeah, that's funny. John, your tip is views help text bug? Views help
Yeah.
text bug. What is
So
that?
I found a bug today. Well, I'm calling a bug. Somebody might email or Twitter me and correct me, but basically it's a combination of using views and better exposed filters for views page filters. And what happens is when you enable those modules, you put your filters on in a block next to your page, in your sidebar or whatever. You actually end up getting the help text from the exposed filter that says leave blank for all, otherwise the first selected term will be the default instead of any. And this text appears underneath each one of your sets of filters. So it's a known problem, and there is a patch for it. Believe it or not, if you go to Drupal.org node 339384, patch 36 is actually the one you want to go with. That's the one that's going to fix the problem for you. And yeah, it was really it's a problem that I've battled with before in the past, and today it reared its ugly head again, and I had to kind of retrace my steps as to how I fixed it the last time around.
How old is that patch, John?
Wow, I was just gonna say this issue is from 8 years ago, and the patch 5 months.
Yeah. So the issue has been around for, like Nick said, since November of 2008, and the patch, I think Nick was right there, 5 months. Yeah, 5 months ago, this
Yeah,
patch
five
was
months ago.
was put up there. So
Although it looks like it's finally been committed, so it should be making it out, or at least the version in Drupal 8 was committed. I don't know if the Drupal 6 one was, since Drupal 6 is no longer
Hmm.
yeah, I'm
supported.
not 100% sure. I can tell you that it's definitely still not working, because I had that problem today. And this actually got switched after that patch. So that patch was comment 36, and in comment 41, it got switched to a Drupal 8 issue, core issue. So I don't really know how that works, but it did. It happened.
Interesting.
So it's apparently an issue in Drupal 8 as well.
So my
That's
tip
also
is
been.
my tip is don't use Drupal.
Oh man,
So let's move on.
that's
So,
that's a
uh, the
bad
reason
tip.
why I say that,
Boo that man.
I've had a couple of instances in the past few months where some companies have come to me and they want a simple website to get started, or replace something simple that they have. And when you sit down and actually look what they need, they really don't need me to build a Drupal website. They really need something a little simpler. In both of these cases, I set them up on Squarespace, got them rolling, picked a template, did a little bit of training, and they're up and running, and they're happy, and I'm happy. So you don't always have to force Drupal as a solution.
It's actually interesting you say that, Steve. I actually run a web server, and one of the people that was on that web server is running Drupal. They're actually running Drupal 6, and I just advised them to switch over to Squarespace because the type of functionality that they need and the budget that they have is not something that we're going to be able to build a Drupal site for. So
Right. Exactly.
um, Squarespace definitely the way to go.
Um, just a
Sounds
tip:
good.
if you haven't used Squarespace, it's not really the easiest tool in the world either.
Really?
It's certainly not necessary for the layman. It's definitely for the layman to edit content, but it might not be for the layman to get the initial layouts all set up.
Huh.
Interesting.
That's good to
Yeah,
know. Good to
yeah.
know.
So anyway, so let's move on to our topic of the day, which is Solr. So let's talk about searching in general. So you've built a Drupal website, and that pesky client wants to have a search box in the upper right hand corner. So what are your options?
Tell them no.
I don't know if that's always an option. I mean, there's a couple of things that Drupal does for you. I mean, one of the options is Drupal does have a core search module. Um, it's fairly limited, but it will you can kind of configure it to search users or content, um, and that's about it. There are a couple of modules out there that will give you a little bit more control over how exactly those are run. A second option that you can do is you can kind of integrate some keyword searching with views, which can give you a little bit better results and more control over, for example, which fields show up on the search page and which content types are searched. But you don't have a whole lot of control. You still don't have a whole lot of control over, like partial matches or weighting information.
And whatever you do, if you are using a views keyword, don't do the Ajax loading of that, because it'll be absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, that's one of the really big drawbacks of views. It's fairly slow, and it's very difficult to cache, because most searches are different. So you have a couple of options. Then there's a couple of other modules out there that will give you more or less control over stuff. But in core, you don't get a lot of control over the algorithm or tying pieces together.
I've found for real basic search, it's adequate.
Yeah.
When is it not adequate, would you say?
When people are expecting to get Google out of Drupal.
Exactly.
Which actually raises a question, slightly off topic, but have either of you guys used the Google search integration into Drupal?
We just hooked it up. We just hooked it up about 3 weeks ago for a customer. Yeah. Yep.
Any good, bad?
It's working fine. They switched from an appliance. Google used to have had an internal appliance that it was working in Drupal 6. We recently converted them to Drupal 7, and they've moved off of the appliance into like a API that's sort of a SaaS kind of implementation, and it seems to have been working fine.
Interesting. Okay.
But that's not the topic for today.
But no, and not at all. It's another search option for you, but
yes.
We're not talking about that one today. Today we are talking about.
So just since you brought it up, John, to elaborate, you can use we've been talking so far about core search in Drupal, and you have now a choice of looking outside of Drupal. A service or software that would index your website and provide the search results for you, and Google provides that service is one thing.
Yep.
But we're not going to elaborate on that tonight, but it's really the same sort of tool, but it's Solr from Apache.
Yeah. And to answer your first question, which was when is core search not adequate? I think the really big answer to that question for me, there's kind of two prongs. One is when the customer wants finer control over what results show up, and that includes things like saying this particular field on a node is more important than this other field, or they want to have partial matches, so they want the word plum to match plumber, plumbers, plumbing, and plum. The core search isn't going to do that. And the second really big thing is when they need like performance and stability. The Google core search is fairly taxing in the system. With Solr, as we'll get into, there's a lot more options when it comes to stability or speed as well.
And you meant to say Drupal core search, not Google, but
yes, Google. Everybody knows Google search is terrible. But
nobody uses that. I'm still using Dogpile over here. So the question I have right off the bat here is, how often do you guys recommend Solr as far as, okay, well, you want to search your website, right? You want to be able to search, you want to be able to do partial word searches, faceted searches, all that stuff. Are you just saying like, oh, if you need to do anything as far as search, like go with Solr because it's going to be better and it's pretty easy to install? Or are you still trying to use Google Core, or now you got me doing it, Drupal Core Search? Either way.
I'd say in 90% of the cases, if it's not Drupal core, then I'm using Apache Solr. There is one exception. I do have one site using the database API module, which is somewhat similar to Solr, but it just uses Drupal database for the cataloging. And I find that it's marginally better than the Drupal core search, but it's a far cry from Solr. So it's generally, if somebody needs an upgraded version of search and it's not an appliance or something like that, then it's Apache Solr.
All right.
So
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, anytime somebody's recommending or needs a search, needs something above and beyond what I think core search can handle, Solr's the way to go. As we'll talk about, there are a bunch of different benefits and some add-on modules that actually make Solr search work incredibly similarly to Google's kind of search, in the way that Google kind of offers up results and gives you certain facets that you can search on and whatnot. So yeah, I think I would even go out on a limb and say, like, if it were to kind of make its way into core as like something that was like, there all the time, that would be pretty awesome, but I don't really see that ever happening.
well, so let's talk about what actually Solr is.
So Solr's an Apache project. It's one of the core projects at Apache, which means that it's been fairly well vetted. If you look at the Apache Solr page, you'll notice that it's got fairly wide adoption across many, many, many different organizations and businesses, and it's extremely powerful. It's got a very strong development background. Being an Apache project, it is open source. I believe that its main website has actually had a fairly recent overhaul as well. Most Apache projects, they look like their website is out of 1992, but it's actually got some
Because they
nice,
are.
but it's actually fairly nice looking, and it gives you just extreme amounts of control over how your particular project is breaking down its searchable entities.
So if I'm using Apache as my web server, do I have everything I need to run Solr?
No. So I guess that's a common misconception. I'm glad you asked that. So Apache is a foundation that helps manage and monitor a bunch of different projects. Probably the most widely known one is the Apache web server, what most people call Apache. But there's several dozen other very widely used projects, one of them being Solr, which is the search appliance. Another one that's not as common is, I believe Hadoop is an Apache project, which is a way for distributed computing. I believe that Google helped put together and put out as well. There's I don't know how many Apache projects there are. I can look that up, but there's several.
There are more than several.
Yeah, there's 60 or 70, so maybe several is an understatement. So
if it has nothing to do with my web server, then what do I actually need? What is it running on? Can it run on the server that I'm using? What do you need to make Solr? Because it's an external product here. So what is it that I need to make that thing work?
So as you said, Apache Solr it's a separate program that you install. It runs on Java. You can install it on the same server that your web server runs on. We'll talk a little bit later in the show whether that's recommended or not. I think I think we have a couple of different opinions on that. If you know Java whatsoever, it runs either on something called Tomcat or on something called Jetty. I'm not extremely familiar on the nuances of the differences between the two, but I believe the main one is one runs as a separate process and one runs as a daemon. But that's I probably should stop there because I'm going to get some angry comments.
So Nick, would you say, and John, would you say that your level of expertise to get Solr running, if you're not using it now, is what kind of skills do you need, and do you need to be an expert at something in order to get this up and running? Should someone be afraid of it if they're listening to this conversation right now?
I would say if you're pretty comfortable kind of doing things on your server, you'll probably be okay. There are let's put it this way: if you can get into the command line and you can kind of work your way around the server, you'll probably be all right. There are some really good tutorials on how to do it, both on the Apache Foundation website and also just in general. You can Google what you need, but there are definitely some good tutorials out there for it.
Yeah, DigitalOcean has some really good user guides on how to install it. So I would say, I would just echo what John said. You definitely need some familiarity with command line and be familiar with that. If you haven't done it before, I would certainly recommend getting a $5 box or a $10 a month box on DigitalOcean to install it first. Because if it's not something that you've done before, you can certainly get into a position where you'll want to start over. So it's definitely a good way. And then their guides, like I said, are very good, so you can just follow along. And then once you're familiar with it, do it on your server.
I really just thought that you were making a PHP joke there, but as I listened on, you didn't. You said I'm going to echo what John said.
Oh yeah. No.
Sorry. I get.
Well,
I missed this opportunity.
I can see after 8 o'clock at night we get the spunky John.
Well, punchy is more like it. Okay. Yeah. Once after the sun goes down, all bets are off.
Okay. All right. Maybe we should move the recording time. After cocktail hour, I guess is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's do a big picture of what Solr does. What does it actually do?
So it connects to your website, sucks out all the data, and then allows you to type into a search box what you're looking for, and then it goes and finds that data and returns it back to you in a format that you determine.
Yep. I would say the only thing I would change in that description is that rather than sucking it from your website is generally pushing that information. So it's coming from your website is submitting that information to Solr. And I see the confusion, but
the wheels are turning because isn't an indexing of a website usually a utility indexing the website as opposed to the website pushing the content?
Usually it is. I believe that in Solr that's an exception, at least in the Drupal version. I know in the Drupal version you can specify when the information gets indexed. So either you're hitting an endpoint that's telling Apache Solr to call a specific page and entity, or you're sending that information over. And I'm fairly certain that Drupal is compiling that entity and sending it over manually when you specify. So I'm pretty sure Apache Solr, you're submitting it. And I think most search appliances work that way. I think the difference with the search engine is because the Spider doesn't control the other website, it's having to go out and manually pull the information. I'm sure that if Google had the opportunity to have every single website send them their information, that would be far more efficient and far better.
Sorry, guys, I get this little cough attack going on here. If you see my mute button going on and off. So let's move on to some of the features of Solr. What? Excuse me again. So go ahead.
That's fine. So as we mentioned, one of the first things is how does it work, and kind of the two main ways. One of the first things that you have to think about is how often you want your information updated. So you can, when you're configuring the Solr, you can choose to have it index a certain number of items at a time, so 50 items at a time, and you can choose to have it index on cron, or you can have it index on a node save. And this is somewhere where you really have to think about it. I mean, if you have a decently high traffic website and a fairly active, you know, group of people editing content, then you need to be very careful with indexing on node save, because then you'll obviously the information will be immediately available for search, which is a huge plus, but it can be a real performance drain on the Drupal site, especially if you end up having the Solr server on the same server as your web server.
All right, so I'm going to stop you there. I got to stop you there for a second. So one of the benefits of using a third-party search is that it's not taxing your Drupal website. So I'm not following you on how node save. I believe it's just making a call over to Solr and said, "Hey, go index this now," and it's really, if it's sitting on the same server or not, is, let's take that out of the equation for a minute, but that's really not going to impact your Drupal side. Isn't that the whole point of this?
So yeah, correct. If you have it on a separate server, then indexing immediately won't have nearly as much of an effect. The only real difference is if you have a really high number of nodes being saved at a time, like with an import or something, it can be problematic because it's an extra step of the process. But if you're not, like I've had trouble even with servers when they're separate with like a feed import or a REST import or something, if just too many entities are sent at the same time. Whereas with cron, they can be bundled up when cron's running and sent off in a separate process. So it's still something to consider, but it's, again, if they're not on the same server, it's a much less of an issue.
So Nick, if I'm indexing, I just want to finish one question here, John. If I'm indexing on node save, is it intelligent enough to only be going to index the things related to that node that I saved? Is that what's going on? Okay.
Yeah, it's only going to index the things that have been changed, either the new node, or a node that's been updated.
Okay.
So it's not reindexing the whole website every single time.
Okay, I want to make sure we're clear about that. Reminds me of some of the new caching, Drupal 8 caching schemes that are happening. John, you had a question.
I was just going to say that a lot of times, depending on, I guess it depends on your website, but a lot of times indexing on cron is going to be good enough for your site. You're not going to need to index on save for, I would say, a majority of the sites out there, because if you think about it, people that are coming to your site and looking for something, if your cron's running every hour, every 3 hours, the chances of them you posting a something and them coming and searching for that something, within an hour or 3 hour window, however your cron set up, that you're looking for it, not really likely. It's going to take a while to get into search engines. It's also going to take a while. Search engines isn't Google, Yahoo, that sort of thing. It's also going to take a while, for people to kind of get up on it and be actually looking for it on your website. So I guess it really does depend on what type of website you're running, but in most cases, you can index on cron without a problem.
So
we've been talking about Solr and Drupal. So there's a module that you're installing to make this connection happen. So you install Solr. That's an independent piece from Drupal. Then you're installing a module on the Drupal side.
Correct. So there,
one of two modules.
Yeah, there used to be a way to do this where you would install the Apache Solr module, and that had a bunch of configuration that you needed to do to your Solr instance to make sure it was running the right schema and the right configuration, and then to get those things talking to one another. I recently actually just installed Solr and started using the Search API module, which actually has a add-on module called Search API Solr, and that's actually really interesting. That module is really interesting because it allows you to set up servers and indexes. So you could set up your site, and go through and say, okay, well, I want it to index, every field on my content type and select the fields that you want. You get body field, title field, so on and so forth, image fields, whatever. Have that be set in your index. And then, you can set up a Solr server to utilize or to use that index. But on the flip side, you could also set up a different type of server. Say you wanted to set up some other search utility. You could do that with Search API. Search API also works with the current versions of Solr. So I think they're up to Solr 5 now, 5.5, something like that.
Yep.
And this works with that. It works really well, and it's really easy to use. Now, the upside to this is with the Search API module, you can actually shut off Drupal's core search. If you're using the Apache Solr module, that actually is kind of an add-on module for the core search that enables another search method using Solr. So you have to have core search on, then Apache Solr on top of that. With the Search API module, you can just have Search API running, and you also want to probably install the Search API pages module so you can get yourself some search pages, some results pages, and whatnot.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely lean towards the Search API and Search API's Solr module as well, and a couple of other features that it gives you. One of the more important ones is it interacts with the Facet API module, so it allows you to it allows you to have faceted searches. So, for example, if you have a couple of different taxonomy vocabularies, you can do faceted searches on those. So you can create blocks that list those taxonomy terms, and then show how many results will show up on there. So you can, and it will do automated filtering. So you can type in a search, and then it will show you the results and show you the 5 different categories that those results show up on. And then you can further tweak that search by checking off a category, and then it will filter down to just those results. And if you have more than one vocabulary, then they're all tied together. So you don't end up with a huge checklist, and you don't end up with a way to search for something that doesn't have a result by clicking different categories. Another thing that it provides is search highlighting. So if you search, for example, like I was saying, plumber before, or plum, it will highlight the result that came back that said, so it will show you this word plum here is the reason why we're giving you this result. So it kind of contextually shows why the results were chosen. And it's like John said, it's very straightforward to set up, and it's far more modern than the other one. I think it's important to mention too that a couple of the more popular Drupal hosts provide Solr searching as well. Acquia has a fairly robust Solr system, as well as Pantheon. So if you're using either one of those hosts, you don't have to worry about setting up Solr yourself. You just have to make sure you have a plan that manages that, and then just enable that module.
On the flip side there too, if you run your own company, you actually also can run your own Solr server. Solr actually has the ability for you to set up cores, and different cores are basically like almost like different environments. So you have your Solr install, and then within your install you have different cores, and you could if you ran your own company and you wanted to offer Solr as a service, or if you were a Drupal shop and you wanted to make your life easier and have Solr search on all your sites, you could actually set up a Solr server for yourself and then give each one of your clients a core on that server. And it would work just the same way as, going to Acquia or going to Pantheon and using their Solr server instances.
John, does that Solr server that you would set up have to be in the same environment, the same networking environment, to work? Like, can I install a Solr
Just needs to be
server?
accessible.
Yeah, as long as it's accessible. So, you know, I mean, you get more into the network architecture of things now, but if you could do IP blocking, or you could just make it accessible to anybody, which seems like a terrible idea to me. But
No, you
you know,
can authenticate them. You can set up authentication.
sure. I mean, you could do that too. So there are a couple different ways you could set it up. I would probably tend to do some IP blocking, just so you can say like, okay, this server is going to access my Solr server, and that's going to be it. But yeah, you can definitely access it from outside of its own network.
Yeah, and I mean the only concern there really is latency at that point. I mean, obviously, the further away it is, and the longer it's going to take for results, and the more restrictions you have, the longer it will take.
So another question back to how this thing works, and it's related to just what you just said, Nick. So we've talked about when I save a node, or if I have a cron job, that it pings off to Solr. Solr comes in and does this indexing. So the indexing, the database that Solr is generating of my terms and my keywords and the content that it's going to search remains on the Solr side.
Yes.
When I actually on my Drupal side I do a search, it's interacting with Solr to get those results.
Yes.
Okay.
And John had mentioned the Search API page, which I haven't used. Most of the time, what I'm doing is building. There's a Search API views integration, and I'm usually using that to access the actual results. So you put a keyword search in it, or I use an integration with. I should say more often I'm using the custom search module. Because the custom search module lets you build specific endpoints and ties in fairly nicely. And it gives you the ability to have more than one search block. So if you don't want one that searches users, for example, one that searches articles or the rest of the content, then you can easily build that.
So Search Pages kind of does the same thing, where it allows you to build search pages, and those are basically just that, they're search results pages. So they give you your own their own search box, and you could also do like, oh, I want a user search. You can do the faceted aspect of it, so it returns certain results for certain quote unquote search pages. I've actually only used it for one specific search page, but definitely kind of the same vibe there as the custom search, where you can kind of set up your pages and set your facets, and you have search blocks and all that sort of stuff.
So we have a few additional features and things that Solr can do for you that you might not think of that we haven't mentioned yet.
Oh,
so
man.
So some of those are some interesting ones are.
I actually have one that I'm absolutely in love with.
Yeah.
Because what's the best part about going to Google, right? Every client is like, oh, I want like Google search, where I start typing and then it tells me like what I want to search for, right? So every client wants that for some reason, probably because it's cool and really helpful. Well, Solr has a module that does that. And it's actually specific to the Search API. So Search API autocomplete actually will tie into your Solr search, and as people are typing, it will say, hey, did you mean this, if they spelled something wrong, or it'll say, okay, here are all the results that kind of match what you're looking for. So say I type in say I go to Talking Drupal and I type in Nick Laughlin, right? It's going to say, oh, hey, there are, 100 results that have Nick Laughlin in them. There's also, some of these other results, and maybe they have part of Nick's name in there or something. I don't know, but it'll give you numbers as to how relevant it is, so you can kind of make an educated guess as to what you're searching for. And really useful, really helpful. And the I'm a notoriously bad speller, so the like, "Hey, did you mean?" feature is super
Yeah.
useful, because I'm like, yes, I did actually mean that. Thank you for correcting me.
I, I don't know what exactly did you mean. Like, yes, I did, and you're showing me those results anyway, but I need the search box to be spelled correctly too. Um, I think one of the next features that something that people look for that Drupal search doesn't allow, that you can get with the Apache Lucene project in conjunction with the Solr search, is you can actually have Solr search other files and entities. So if you have a client that has a large repository of PDFs, you can have Solr search internal to the PDFs. So if you just have an archive of minutes, meeting minutes, for example, rather than having somebody copy and paste and put that information in, you can have Solr index the PDFs directly, which is a huge time saver.
Yeah, and super useful. Especially if you have like a document repository, something where you're going to have a large amount of documents. Actually going to use that on a project. Thanks for the advice.
Not a problem. And what are the other two features you were mentioning, Stephen? Because those are the only two that came to my mind.
So we had talked about faceted search, and then
When you can get your breath.
you had actually talked about views integration, and that's something that is really interesting, because currently with the current Drupal search, right, there is really no views integration. I mean, you got like keyword search, which is meh, works okay, works pretty well, but you actually have Solr views integration. Nick, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I personally haven't really done any real deep views integration with Solr.
Yep, that's actually a good question. So when you install these modules, you get a new okay, so I actually don't know what this is called, but when you're creating a view, you have the opportunity to say this view is searching on what. So the base table, basically, whether you're looking at content or you're looking at users or taxonomies, you get a new option for indexed nodes, or something of that sort. You choose that option, and it basically is giving you access to items that have been indexed by Apache Solr. You can then create a exposed filter of the search field and create the sorting however you want. One of the only drawbacks of that approach is you get some difficulty when trying to pull in certain relationships. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. Also, sometimes trying to pull in some information about a particular node is a little bit difficult, but it still gives you a lot of control, and much better control than the general core search.
That's actually really interesting. Have you found, actually, this is going to be a question. Have you found that if you don't plan on using Solr in views early on, that it is hard to kind of integrate after the fact?
No, not whatsoever. I mean, the biggest part there really is planning the indexing. Like I have a couple clients that run some phone book websites, and we use Apache Solr to. The two main things we use it for is to categorize their advertisers and make it so that advertisers show up first in the search results. So we give the advertiser flag a very high weight. So if, for example, they search for plumbers and there's a plumber that is an advertiser, they'll show up before non-advertisers. So fairly standard stuff.
The,
Um,
the last time I did a Views Solr integration, I think it was using the Apache Solr module. So maybe the Search API module is a little bit better at integrating with Views and Solr.
yeah, I've not used the Apache Solr module with that, so I'm not sure. I would say though the one caveat is though, like you import for this it was a small town, so there were 15,000 phone numbers, I believe. That takes, and if you're indexing even 500 at a time, and you run it once an hour, that's going to take 4 or 5 days to index. So you definitely want to make sure that you definitely want to make sure that you've planned out when it's going to launch. Make sure that everything's indexed. And I see the note. I just saw the note now that you had put Stephen in the chat. So we had spoken a little bit about relevant sorting, and I kind of just glazed over that there too. But one of the really cool features is that you have a lot of knobs to tweak on how something gets chosen, whether it's more relevant or not. So like I said, in the phone book site, you wanted the word plumber to show every single plumber in the phone book. I mean, if people are being excluded for whatever reason, people aren't going to use the search and use the website, which defeats the purpose. But you want to be able to you want to be able to show the significance. So, for example, if you search for plumber, you're probably looking for somebody who's a plumber, and you want to show advertisers first. So that flag for advertiser gets a really high value. But, for example, if somebody looks for plum, well, and there's somebody named Steve Plum, then he needs to show up first because plum matches. But you'll also see plumbers because that's a root word. So it would show, in that case, it would show first Steve Plum, his phone number, and then it would show plumbers that were advertisers, and then it would show plumbers that weren't advertisers. So you can really tweak and get much more intelligent searches. Whereas in Drupal, if you type in plum, then it's not going to, it will just show Steve Plum. It won't show any of the plumbers. If you type plumbers, it won't show Steve Plum whatsoever. So if he's just an acquaintance, if you don't know his last name is Plumber, then in Drupal core search, you're just searching each and every one. It also
It
does.
sounds like there's a joke in there somewhere.
I just keep thinking phrasing. I don't know why, but that's just me.
You fan of Archer? So it's yeah, it gives you a lot of really fine-tuned control. You can also do a lot of, there's something called stop words, which is another thing that we didn't mention. So Solr, you can get to exclude certain phrases like the, a, and you can also define them. So if you have a particular product where I don't know, say you sell clothes and everything's made out of lycra, you want to hide, you don't want that word to show up with high relevance. You can say this word doesn't count, don't index it. Mm-hmm. And you can also do some Porter Summer stuff, which is what I had mentioned with the root word and chosen words.
So I mean, all in all, we're gonna move on a little bit here, but all in all, I mean, Solr is probably about 90% more configurable than Drupal core search, right? As far as being able to do all of these great, amazing things with your search results.
So when do I not want to use it? When I don't need it, or is there something more there?
When you don't need it. I mean, I would say, if you need somewhat complex searches, then Solr is the way to go. If you don't, I would say I use Solr probably on 10-20% of the projects that I work on. When are you starting to get into a situation where Solr isn't enough? That's extremely rare. You have enterprise, you have really long-standing enterprise websites. I think DuckDuckGo uses it, but if you get to a situation where it's not working, then you're looking at something like Google Appliance.
I think the quickest answer for me is like anytime you're putting search on a site, if your site is going to have a search box and it has more than like 50 pages on it, you should probably be using Solr. I would even venture to say, like, if you're going to put a search box on a website, you should be using Solr because I have the knowledge to set it up. I know it's pretty easy to set up, and it works a ton better than the core search. But
So I think, John, you've kind of hit like a hurdle there. So the first hurdle is doing your first one, getting your first one
yep,
running, and then once you have that knowledge, just like anything else, it's now you're no longer afraid of it, and maybe it's something more common to do. But I also think it leads into our last question here is, you're saying 50 pages. That sounds like a real small site to me.
Yeah.
But when should Solr be on a separate server? Is it always, or how do you handle the server side of this?
full disclosure, I was actually going to say 10 pages originally.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
You know, my,
I,
I'll let Nick go first on this one.
No, but
Well,
John, if you go from the extreme of 10 pages, you're either going to use Squarespace or you're going to jump right into Solr.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I just want to address that comment first
Yeah.
before we get into the single
Yeah.
server or not, because
Yeah.
I mean, I think it changes if you're a freelancer or not, and I think the big thing is it's a separate system to maintain.
Right.
And you don't, even as a freelancer, you don't always have the opportunity to put them all on one server because you have clients that don't want their data on a server with other clients. And I would say that's the vast majority of clients. I mean, you're not in a position very often where you can just have one server with all the Solr on it, and then 10 different, 20 different clients connecting to it, because they just don't want that data mixing, even though they're in separate cores. So it is a separate system to maintain. So I would say the majority of the time, most sites don't need search. Smaller sites, like a 10-page site, doesn't need search. 50-page, if the
not at all.
architecture is, yeah, if the architecture is done right on a 50-page site, it doesn't really need search either. But if you do need search, I mean, most of the time, most clients, I'll say, let's try core at first, see if it's acceptable. And by try, I don't mean necessarily launch. I mean, just turn on the block and let them search the page. Just see if things show up, see if people can find what they're looking for, do a couple of user tests. And if it doesn't work, then just very quickly move to Apache Solr. But it's definitely not always. It's fairly simple to set up, but it's a separate system to maintain, which is a lot of overhead.
So I'm actually looking because I was curious to see if there was like a Solr service that you could just go out and say like, hey, I want you guys to maintain my
Oh, I'm
Solr
sure there's
server.
dozens.
Open Solr. I just kind of stumbled across it here. And they have shared Solr instances and dedicated Solr instances.
Is that an endorsement of their services?
Not at all. If you use them and they steal your identity, do not come looking at me. You got to do your own due diligence. I did about a 5-second Google search on this, but they do have Solr services, and they're willing to give them to you as low as $10 per month.
They have a Drupal icon on their homepage too. They must be good.
They must be reputable, right? They're probably going to send me nasty emails now, as because I poo-pooed them. But anyway,
Which one was this? Open Solr?
Open Solr, yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they look pretty interesting. I mean, if you were looking for that kind of service, they're probably worth looking at. Actually, I have a client in mind for taking a look at that too.
So now you can actually use Solr on every website because Nick's main point was you had to kind of maintain Solr. So now you don't have to do that anymore. Problem solved. The world's a better place.
And back to the question that started this was, would you ever run it on the same server? Does that ever make sense? I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time in my head, like thinking that would make sense in any way. But
Nick's gonna tell you that it's not the worst idea in the world, which he's not 100% wrong. But my preference is that you run Solr on a separate server, if you can. Now, where it makes sense to run it on the same server is if you are like small company, don't have a ton of resources, don't have the ability to run 2 separate servers. It makes sense to just run it on your web server. Downfall to that is, you're a smaller company, you're probably not getting a ton of traffic, so your web server could probably handle it. Where it becomes a problem is you most times want your web server to handle your web traffic, right? if your web server is also handling your Solr indexing and searching and so on and so forth, Solr is pretty efficient. It's pretty light on resources, but you don't want it taking away from your web server. So if you have the ability to run it on a separate server, I would recommend doing it, but you could run it on the same server as well. And now that I know that there's a company out there that'll give me Solr hosting for $10 a month, it makes great sense to go to a separate server.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that actually. I mean, I think there are instances where having it on the same server makes sense, and I think John kind of outlined those. For example, I have a client that has a fairly low traffic site, and the content gets updated maybe once a year. And it didn't make sense to pay for a second server or maintain a second server just for Apache Solr. So that site's been up for about 2 years, and it's never had a problem.
They must have a ton of content if they only update it once a year and they need Solr.
Oh, there's a ton of content. There's a lot of content, and people need to search it. It's just on an extremely high traffic site, and they don't update it.
I think that's a great use case for the same server.
Yeah.
I think
And the second one
line,
is it's a deployable solution, and this was before I knew Chef and other automated solutions for maintaining different recipes. So this will, if this project gets bigger, it will likely change into probably a more dedicated Solr system. That's funny. I finally made a pun. A more dedicated system for Solr that all the different sites connect to. But they needed the ability to have separate. That took a while. They needed to have separate webheads for each subsite. So I just packaged Solr together with Apache and put them together. Now that site gets a little bit more traffic, and about once every 6 or 8 months, I have to log in and restart the Tomcat service because they too much content got posted at once, and it was down. But it hasn't been a major problem. And like I said, if that project takes off, then it'll change anyway and get solved with a different solution.
Okay, so I think we have exhausted our comments on Solr this evening, and I think we've gotten to the point that someone could actually would have a good understanding of whether it was appropriate or not, and have a little bit of confidence in getting started with it. So,
fine. If you guys have questions, you can always leave comments on the talkingdrupal.com website, or send us tweets.
Or you can call us.
Yeah, you could actually call us at 401-400-2004. Or you could email us at talkingdrupal@gmail.com. We get feedback all those ways. And our comments, we've been getting more and more comments on the website as well. So great. So let's move on to our module of the week, which is multi-step registration. I think I put this in, didn't I?
Was it me?
Yeah, so multi-step registration is a module that allows you to create a wizard-like interface for a registration page. So if you have a situation where, let's say you want to collect, when someone registers, you want to collect 4 or 5 pieces of information, and you really don't want them in one short form, but you'd rather take them through a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, that's exactly what multi-step registration is for. It works with Profile 2. It's real easy to set up, and it works quite nicely. So the first step of your wizard is your username and password. Second step would be collect a phone number. Third step, put your first name, last name, that kind of thing. And it works nicely. So take a look at it if that's the kind of thing you need.
It works with mobile. Doesn't have a problem on a cell phone.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. So I discovered this module about a month ago when we were scoping out a project for a customer who was looking for a wizard-type interface, and was surprised I had never seen this in the past. So I had originally thought we were going to be doing, form API things to make this happen, and it turns out that this module from the prototype that we put together worked perfectly. And I don't know why it would have any trouble with mobile. I mean, it's just, it would just be CSS stuff that we would be doing behind the scenes. I'm not sure how responsive friendly it is out of the box, but it's really just basic forms.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was actual page loads or.
Yes, it was page loads. I did not notice if it had a. I did not notice if it had an AJAX capability. I'm not sure if it does or not.
Okay. Very
All
cool.
right. Excuse me. Okay, so I think that's a wrap, isn't it?
Yeah, I just like to tell you guys, one of our front end developers, Nicole, is actually watching the show, and she feels very confident that she can install and use Solr. So we are doing our job tonight.
Excellent. Good.
I expect to see that for the example site for our next show.
She'll definitely be doing my next Solr install. She doesn't know it yet, but she will be.
That's awesome. Well, good luck, Nicole. Send us a comment or call our phone number with any questions. All right, guys. So, John Picozzi, where can people find you online?
Oh man, you can find me all over the internet at John Picozzi on all the social networks and always on at umthink.com.
Awesome. How about you, Nick?
And you can find me online at Nixvan, Nicxvan, pretty much everywhere.
Excellent. And I'm Stephen Cross on Twitter, Stephen Cross with a PH, or parallaxinfotech.com for my website. So talk to you guys next week. Take care.
See you next week.